title of this evening's Dharma talk is When Knowing Ceases. Did I get that right? So the idea here with that title is, my intention is to give you some indication of how it could feel, or how it would be, what the experience would be like when the knowing part of the mind, the knowing this or knowing that, or not knowing this, or that part of the mind that tends to, evaluate, add things up, look at it in terms of categories. I like it, I don't like it, it's good, it's not so good. And not really being too concerned about those kinds of reference points. And so it is like when you don't know anything. It's like, of course, you're looking at the world. You can see that you're in a room. You know it's time for lunch or something like that. So we're not saying that kind of knowing is gone. It's just all of the extra kinds of additions about the nature of everything and the way things fit, and it's like seeing that things are opposites, night and day, inside, outside, seeing the opposites, but there's no opposition. There's no tension or struggle between the opposites that appear. So there's no, you could say that it's like walking through a room, or sitting in a room, or putting down the newspaper, or looking across the room and not really adding anything up. Looking and seeing, and also not necessarily registering, well, this is blue, this is red, this is round, this is square. You're not actually going into even basic categories like that. You're not really doing anything but, you could say, receiving through the six sense fields, including the mind. You're just on receive, and if nothing shows up, you don't mind. So it seems to be very important to bring your awareness as you train in this tradition, and in this way of trying to understand reality. We're trying to understand who you are and what this world is, to persist in continuing to look and see, what is this and what is that? Who am I, you could say. One of the practices in the Hindu tradition is Atma Vichara, or self-inquiry, which is a basic practice that was taught by the sage of the last century, Ramana Maharshi. Atma Vichara. That's an extremely bright light. Is that the sun? No, it's just a 100 watt. So the Korean teacher of the last century, who's passed away now, Sokuzan, actually wrote a book called Only Don't Know, or Only Don't Know Mind. So there's there's a willingness to not have particular information about anything, to actually, you can't really empty out your mind, but you can slow down the grasping, the rejecting, and the shutting down. You can slow that way down just by being with whatever is happening. Whatever appears is fine. Whatever goes away is fine. So it's not a complete laissez-faire. You're not totally blocking everything out and just pretending to be a block of would. But I guess what I not only I guess, but I know that when I'm intending to communicate to you through this talk title. What was the talk title? Can anybody remember?
When knowing ceases. When knowing ceases.
So when knowing does cease, the ego mind, when that kind of reference point starts to slow down or gets, or like you see a problem or a situation or someone asks you a question and you have that feeling of not knowing, what quite often accompanies that is a feeling of, well, I really should know that, or I'm a little embarrassed because I don't know that, or I'm a little on edge because I don't remember something and I should remember. It's like seeing somebody that you really know and being or that you've met and that you should know their name but you've forgotten their name and you're a little embarrassed about that, embarrassed about not knowing that. It's that kind of that's where the self-centeredness starts to show up, when you actually you're not really that concerned about the person. You're concerned about what that person you are imputing that person might think of you if you don't remember their name. So instead of saying, who are you? And they would say, what? You don't remember who I am? And you've been trying to sell me insurance? So, you know, if those of you who have been in sales, which I have, you know that one of the most important things you can remember is someone's name, because if you don't remember their name, you probably have lost the sale. At least they're really considering all those wonderful people they just met recently that remember their name. So what's being encouraged is through this title is to encourage you to actually experiment with that a little bit. See what it's like when you're not just on the cushion, but when you're in your kitchen or in your room or in your hallway or bathroom. It's just look at what is in front of you or what is appearing in any of the sense fields, and have a willingness to not indulge yourself in it at all. It's like being disinterested, but it's not something you do because that becomes extra. But it's like not looking away, but not being so interested that you're grasping in terms of describing it or even appreciating it. In the sense of, that's really beautiful, or that looking at a flower arrangement is quite often that kind of thing is somewhat helpful, because you can actually see the spaciousness of something. You can understand its arrangement without particularly knowing how it was made or how you would do that yourself. But you can access it in terms of something that's there and the space that's around it. But not knowing actually enhances your perception of that, rather than knowing enhances it. Knowing something about something actually takes away, because that's when you start looking at what you know about it rather than what is in front of you. So I would like to have some questions about that. I could talk more, but questions about it would be really helpful. Yes?
Does not knowing show up differently than forgetting?
Yes. I mean, you may have a similar experience, but not knowing is it's an attitude of not grasping, whereas of not grasping or rejecting or doing anything. It's an attitude of just presence. Whereas forgetting is something that it's gone around the corner, and you're searching for how to bring that back around. So there's a sense of loss with forgetting. Whereas with not knowing, there's no sense of loss. There may even be a sense of fullness, that you don't need anything else. It's like, it would be like, even to take it into that area that you're speaking of there, like you don't even need to remember. what presence, this situation as it is, this moment is always here. And there are not, you could say there's moment after moment after moment, but actually it's just the same moment. It's always this. It's a complete relaxation into whatever's occurring and no demand on anything. Even though things may be showing up to be challenging, or they're not bringing your food on time, or you've gone to have something done, and suddenly the appointment you had at 3 o'clock is now 3:45, and you still have not gotten in to see the doctor yet. So that's the kind of contrast or opposites where there's no tension. It's just that, but there's not even a comment that comes along and says, "Just be here now." There's no lecture going on anywhere. So you're so completely there that you don't have an evaluator telling you or interpreting your experiences. Well, at least I'm in the now, or there's no comment like that happening. Yes, sir.
Can our demands be relaxed into?
They would have to be. You would have to. That's a good question. You would, whatever the demand came up, you would not get rid of the demand, but you would just allow the demand to be there. Because the demand is really no different than a rock. A rock is no different than a pine cone. A pine cone is no different than a thought pattern. It's just phenomena that we attribute ideas to. They arise in different ways with different frequencies and so on, but we tend to differentiate them and separate them out with some kind of usually a materialistic idea, gaining idea of getting somewhere, accomplishing something, knowing something, getting ahead, being a really good tutor. Aren't you a tutor? No. Do you think I'm a tutor? I'm more like a four-door. Further questions? Yes.
How does the fear of not knowing when it comes up, should we look at that as self-centeredness? Is that helpful?
No interpretation. We might say self-centeredness, but we just do that so that we can talk about it. But when you're experiencing that, do nothing extra. Again, that's even not knowing that. To come to any conclusion about anything is the opposite of including. Just include whatever. If you need a practice, if you need a path, then include, rather than conclude. The whole world is concluding. You notice that? Everybody's got some damned idea about something all the time. So we're not.
Does it ever get comfortable to be in, just hang out and not knowing?
It's more like you don't. The discomfort that arises, comes and goes, is not a problem anymore. It's just part of, as the Buddha said, life is suffering. He didn't say a little bit of life is suffering, and this other part's pretty cushy over here. It's life is, there's some kind of difficult way of nerve endings. We feel, we see, smell, touch, taste, and you're around, receive, and some of those areas, some of the objects that come are more challenging or difficult or abrasive than other ones. So the idea is just don't do anything with that. You could say being somewhat disinterested in the situation. If you don't feel good about something, just some disinterest about. Like it's like saying they don't care if you ever feel better. Not easy. It's not something you would make a statement about, but you would be so clear about things coming and going in consciousness, and we're living beings, so not going to war with anything, not going to war with thoughts, not going to war with apparent opposition, so that you can see that they're just opposites. They're not opposing each other. They're not struggling. They're just night and day. They're just Buddhas and sentient beings, living beings. Should you?
I don't understand how there can be opposites without opposition.
Just a simple example would be inside and outside. Inside of a house, outside of a house. No opposition. There's no tension there. There's no right and wrong to it, although there are two different things, two different aspects of the same thing. Something about space, night and day, life and death. Good and evil is a good one because it's so polarized. Really, really good and really, really evil. Those are thought forms. Those are not. Those are inventions. Go ahead.
Where does the tension come into
We
play?
want the second noble truth of the Buddha. We want things to be different than they are, rather than realizing that whatever is arising is dependently arisen. If it's arising, it has to be there. It's not rising arbitrarily to give you a hard time. And this has to do with your personal life. Look at your life over the last 10 minutes, 10 years, and notice that things get pretty bad and they clear up, and then they get just like weather, it comes and goes. And then we impute or we take it personally. We think it's happening to someone just because there's nerve endings and sixth sense consciousnesses and the five skandhas. We impute or we think that that's somebody who needs to avoid or needs to get better, or we invent a person.
How do we see the opposites without setting up some sort of opposition or tension?
Good one. Yeah, I think it's just a matter of continuing to practice. This is why we sit down, hold still, and we just watch what continues to move. It may be the diaphragm, it may be a thought about some aspect of something that's happening in our life that may come and maybe even give us a hard time. It may just surface and surface. And the idea there is, what if you're sitting down and holding as still as possible without being rigid. This is not separate from the Buddha. Dogen talks about this. Dogen, that's along with a lot of the other things that Dogen says. It's difficult to grasp because he's pointing at relative situation and absolute at the same time.
If we feel something that could be described as tension, but we don't see the two polarities, is it important to notice what those two opposites are?
No. What is important is whatever rises. It's just that. It's just the texture of that. Adding anything onto it, if it hurts or if it's painful, you're probably going to just impulsively or be kind of reactionary and add on comments about it. What the hell's going on here? Why am I feeling like this? Those situations actually tend to keep that going, keep that kind of a feeling continuing to, it just perpetuates it because there's some kind of resistance to it, or there's some kind of grasping at it. Explaining it is grasping. Trying to push it away is the kind of grasping where you're grasping at not wanting it to be there. So it's still about grasping and fixation.
Is wanting the tension to be resolved still grasping there?
On some level, but can't hardly help that. If we don't feel good, we'd like that to go away. So it's about bringing as much awareness to that as possible, so that that whole situation relaxes. And it's just it seems to, if we see it clearly in a wide open space, then there's less demand about it, and there's more of a, you could even say, intuitive understanding about just the nature of difficulty or suffering, that it comes and goes. Things occur, and we, over time, we take it less and less personally or seriously. But it's not the idea of going the other way and trying to push it away and make it be impersonal, or try to detach ourselves. Some teachers or teachings talk about detachment into something is something that you can do, and I would say it's something you are. You know?
Question from Jim Service out in Arizona.
James.
He asks, is not knowing akin to beginner's mind?
Yes. You don't. You're a beginner all the time. You don't know what to do, what not to do, what to think. Yes.
Andrew up in Grand Rapids has two questions. He asks first, why read books if you're okay with not knowing?
Well, don't read books. So the idea with sitting is about to put it very literally. The idea with sitting is about the intuition, about emphasizing just the awareness part. It takes a while because we start sitting, we tend to have a whole lot of stuff going on, commentaries and all kinds of interpretations, modifications, elaborations, and all the other Asians coming and going when we sit. So, but that's about the intuition. It's about finding our heart connection, our bodhicitta, an awakened mind, already Buddha. And the study is about giving the self-centered mind, this is my understanding of it, not something I was taught, it's just how it looks from working with this for a while, is about helping each person to take the activity of the mind that is usually propelled by the self-centeredness of the ego or the seventh consciousness to try to find out things and get things and acquire things and understand things and all of the other. And it's about exercising it in such a way that instead of just analyzing, you're actually being introduced to just like the Nagarjuna's fourfold negation, not this, not that, not both, not neither. That's an astonishing statement about anything. And just like the 30 verses or the 20 verses of Vasubandhu, or we could go on and on. I'm just saying that by coming in and studying this particular material that is has been written, it's a cumulative tradition. So down through the centuries, not only the Buddha, but other teachers who have practiced what the Buddha taught and had some understanding arise, then they might bring in their idea about conceptually how this whole situation looks. So then we, as students of this Buddha's Dharma, we sit down with there's hundreds, thousands of books. We sit down with a few maybe core teachings, like foundation teachings for Zen and Chan Buddhism, or mind-only teachings, or Yogacara, which would be the Samdhinirmachana Sutra, Lankavatara Sutra, and then of course a more well-known Heart Sutra, Diamond Sutra. And look at this, and look at how these whoever these people were that wrote these down, brought these these teachings come out of their understanding about it, and so therefore we look at that, and this gives the self-centered mind some kind of activity besides just making up stuff based on the experience of doing sitting meditation. So rather than off the cushion, rather than take that into some kind of conceptual thing about how well I'm doing because I'm becoming so clear, instead you have to go into the various forms of that the Buddha's teachings take, depending on the teacher, the teaching, the sutra, whatever it may be, and you're bringing your conceptual mind into that. So you're kind of coming at this self-centeredness from both ends, from the intellectual, conceptual side, and from the intuitive or the heart level side. So up here and here too. So you're kind of working with this in such a way. It's called the two wings of the bird. It needs the intuition, needs the prajna and upaya, needs skillful means, needs wisdom. Wisdom's the open part, and the feminine part, and upaya is the you could say male aspect. that is about the structure of everything in the pragmatic or practical area. And this is something that well, you could say Coben too, but I'm thinking of Dogen, is very good at talking it out of both sides of his ears. You know, it's very challenging. And I would say, what I think I said this morning is, allow yourself to, don't have to work on that too hard. Allow yourself to that's where this talk title came from. Allow yourself to just not know what that is and experience the not knowing quality of it, rather than scurrying around trying to figure out what did he mean. Actually contemplate it, but allow the feeling of not knowing to show up, because this is where when Dogen says firewood does not become ash, this is the space that he's coming out of. He sees this. And that's why this teaching, instead of us looking at this thinking, oh, that doesn't mean anything, I'm not going to study that. Instead, there's something that magnetizes us about that, because we have an understanding that there's something he's saying that we need to take a look at that. Michelle?
Is that understanding knowing?
Well, the very word knowing, Sanskrit for that is jnana, or knowledge, but it's a high form of knowledge, not based on contrast or reference points. It's a fundamental insight into the nature of everything, which is what apparently the Buddha saw, and this is where the words came out of his mouth that everything is dependently arisen. So he actually saw that everything, you can't find one thing anywhere that has its own svabhava, or own being, has its own. It's totally interlaced or interconnected or dependently or originated with everything else. And this means our thoughts, our ideas, our fingernails, the way we walk, our mother and our father and our family, and just everything is dependently arisen. So, and to begin to see that not just on kind of a description level, well, yeah, sure, got to have water to make a tree grow, and you need some sunshine, but that doesn't mean the oak tree is connected with a pile of marshmallows. Well, yes, it does. It just might be more challenging to your insight.
Andrew's other question was, you've talked before about not thinking much. Does that show up differently for people who see clearly?
Read that again.
You've talked before about not thinking much. Does that show up differently for people who see clearly?
I don't know. I don't know about what other people see. But you could paraphrase that. You could ask that same question in a different way if you'd really like a different answer to it. Go ahead.
So while he's doing that, Shigetz has a question from Traverse City.
I know her.
She asks, what can be seen when we notice the pattern of things getting bad and then clearing up over and over?
What can be seen? You're just seeing things doing exactly what you're saying. So the teaching that we study here, and in this tradition of mind only or consciousness only, is whatever's happening, you're seeing that, but the actual witness of that, the subject part of that, is not separate from what is showing up. Excuse me, and in such a way that there's actually, what is actually seen is not actually separate from the subject. So the whole idea of some kind of otherness is not excuse me, not there in the way that the ego mind or the subconsciousness imputes that other thing. David.
Are all the different types of knowing ceasing? For instance, recognition, study, understanding, intelligence.
Good question. Quite a bit of that. What happens is that it starts to find its own dimension, no longer based on self-centeredness, on hope and fear, or ego. So therefore, unless you've transcended the personal self, unless you've actually seen what that is, then you will panic when you start to not know stuff. You'll start to feel like you'll blame it on old age or too many drinks, not enough water. I'm not drinking enough water, therefore I'm starting to space out. We'll find some attribution going on, but you could lose touch with different ways of knowing it, which is what I think you're asking about. Just the different ways of knowing things. What happens is the solidity of that you were used to a few years ago of a knower who knew things, that goes. So therefore, all of the things that are known are no longer separate from the imputed subject. So therefore, they're not separate anymore. So then all you have is perception only. And then what's the opposite of perception only?
Not separate.
What? See how that feels? There's no right answer to that. You could say, well, emptiness. Or you could say, not separate is opposite to not separate, because there aren't two things anywhere. There's not, it's been said traditionally that the nature of reality is so not separate that anything that you think of as two things, you can't get a piece of paper between them because there's no space between anything. We're not saying that there isn't space between this and that. There is, provisionally and relatively there is, but absolutely there is not. So we're right back to another kind of polarity. And the ego mind, the self-centered mind, wants to make some sense out of that. Make it so that we can put that to use. This is called spiritual materialism, yes. Yes.
What's a demonstration of understanding if there's no right answer?
I heard what you said, but I want you to paraphrase that so I can see what your positionality is on that. I hear what you say, but paraphrase it.
What is the understanding that someone presents when they're put on the spot?
Who? Someone who's confused or someone who's clear?
Well, I think about the stories that we sometimes read between teacher and student, and sometimes they talk about the student presenting their understanding to the teacher. So I'm just wondering what's being presented if there's no right or wrong.
If the person is presenting out of their being clear, then they probably wouldn't present anything. If you're clear, why would you say anything? Anything to prove? Keep coming if you have more to that. I'll tell you what it feels like. What it feels like is to see a dog run in front of you, and your friend is sitting next to you. And the interesting thing about the dog is one of its legs is missing, so it's running in front of you. And you say to your friend, look, a one-legged dog. Little transcendental dyslexia there. And that would not be incorrect. Although you think, well, no, it has a leg missing, so it's not. It's a three-legged dog. And then you would say, no, that's a stool. That's 3 legs. So what am I saying? I'm saying that you can take the relative situation if you understand it. You can move in any direction, and it'll appear to make sense. Go ahead.
Just think about, like, if I were to get up there and endeavor to do what you were doing, I wouldn't be able to do it. So what's the understanding there?
I don't have any position on anything. I don't know anything. It's like the title of the talk. I really don't function out of some kind of knowing. So what am I functioning on? If I were not making any sense on some level, if it was totally a basket case, then you probably wouldn't listen to what I have to say. But it's go ahead.
Does teaching appear as demonstrating understanding?
A little bit. It could. What are you writing?
What you just said.
What did I say?
A little bit.
I said a little bit. All right. Keep the track. Yes.
Is there some kind of trust that you have in not knowing them?
It's like trust, but it's more like just seeing that there is no position to, or there's no knowledge that is actually opposed to something else. Nothing is opposed to something else. And the feeling, as I've said many times, although it's been going on for a long time, it doesn't look all that unusual anymore, but I don't see anything but myself. I see you're not separate from me. And it's not like a togetherness that used to be separate. It's like it's always been that way. It just took a while to see it. So there's nothing to do. There's nothing to accomplish. There's only something to do if somebody has a question about what this is. If no one has any questions, everyone goes home, then I probably would go home too. It's just like the situation. Use an example. The window business was an idea to have something that we could do in the monastery that would be really helpful, because it would be something we could do. We could make money restoring windows or window restoration. But if people don't want to do that, then I don't have any problem with that. So I'm not interested in promoting anything. We're presenting this, and so it looks like that might not work. So, well, this doesn't mean anything's wrong. Things are just functioning the way they function, and I'm watching them. So, is that as an example? Do you see what I'm saying? It's not like there's no failure there. There's no, I did all this work. No, not necessarily. Things are just appearing and disappearing just the way they need to. Nothing leads to anything else. Yes?
2 more questions from Andrew up in Grand Rapids.
Yes.
First, does seeing clearly necessitate not thinking?
No, the thinking part is it's just not it's not a fixation or panicked kind of trying to grasp at something. The thinking may arise, it may not. One of the traditional ways of saying this is thoughts without a thinker. So the identity part is there's no solid identity. It's not that there isn't a discontinuous identity that shows up and then goes away, and then something else comes up, and then this particular line of thinking or conversation, there's some kind of identity, but it's just not solid, and it's discontinuous like everything else is. So I'm not going to say don't think, although some teachers will say that. Don't think. I might say that if somebody came in and was really upset, I might say, well, just don't think about it. I might say that, but I probably would more likely say, you got 4 hours? They would say, yeah. I said, go look at the wall for 4 hours and come back and talk to me. Yes.
His other question, what is teaching?
From the way I see it, it's responding in such a way that supports each person's, wherever they're at, supports them in a way where they can, through their practice, can eventually see what is true for themselves. It's not feeding them something. It's not giving them too much information where they can cling to it or hang on to it. There's nothing to believe, nothing to disbelieve. So always I say over and over again, it's necessary to meet everyone where they're at. And if you meet everyone where they're at, then everyone is exactly the way they need to be. You don't have any disagreement with anyone. If they're doing something totally different, if they totally disagree with you, you would just listen to that and you would just receive that. You wouldn't think, well, they just don't understand how profound my wisdom is. You wouldn't think that. You would just not separate yourself from anyone. And so, and that might not be as noticeable in this environment where everyone here is functioning as different levels of being a student, a different level of connection with this person as a teacher, and same thing with Andrew. But it's that's each person that I talk to has a different kind of combination of confusion and clarity. They're very clear in some ways, and there's confusion in other ways. So endeavoring to meet someone where they're at and maybe seeing that, but not jumping into their life and saying, you really need to, you shouldn't do that, you should do this. Now, if somebody comes to me and is in a difficult straits about something and ask me about it, then I probably will give them, if I know I have a permission, and they actually are, I can see that they've got everything on receive, they want to know, then there's a good chance I will say something. But I have people do things that they don't even know that I think it's kind of, that seems to be based on a misunderstanding. But I'm not going to say that to them. That's not, it would be meddling with them. They need to understand their life, not I need to tell them what their life is. So people do, like the people that come and practice for a while and then go somewhere else, I kind of think maybe they should stay here, but I don't know that. Maybe they need to go somewhere else. I'm not so full of what I do to think that everything I say is needs to be done or something.
Michael here in Battle Creek, Michael Stoltz asks, can we not know in our daily mundane life?
Yes. That's exactly what I'm talking about. I don't need to know if I pick up this, whatever this is, I put it back down. It's not that the names and forms and everything won't show up with that, but just as you're picking this up, the name of that or the relationship or what you need to do with that, it'll come together on its own. It's just about being here. And the difference is between someone who's present and someone who is all wound up in their thought patterns and their hope and their fear and their confusion and their worry about trying to figure things out, is they're struggling. And the person who is present is not struggling. Even if things get really difficult, they're probably not going to struggle.
Can names and labels still appear around objects in not knowing?
It's just more phenomena. It's just that you don't do anything with it, and that you don't make it into something, and there's no person, being, who is separate from that. So you're always picking up yourself, and you're, without being particularly facetious, you're always talking to yourself when you talk to others. When it talks about the sutra we do in the mornings, Song of the Jewel Mirror Samadhi, there's a lot of metaphors in there that are very powerful to help us see the way we use relative truth in such a way to help break down our fixation on right and wrong and good and bad. And the whole idea of a mirror is that way because you're looking at a mirror, but because you're looking at your own mind projecting onto someone. So you're looking at a mirror then. That's the first mirror you start to see. And then eventually, if you look at that mirror and you see that it's a mirror, then that mirror, because it's been found out, then that mirror, just because it's based on fixation, and it's based on warfare, it's based on wanting things to be different than they are, that mirror collapses, and you begin to see what's actually there, which is not separate. But you may have to look in that mirror for a while, like the wall.
Michael has another question. Is there a difference between knowing and not knowing?
That's a really hard question. Yes, the not knowing is a form of knowing, and the knowing is a form of not knowing. Did you? You had a question?
I did. You might have just answered it. How does sometimes it seems like your not knowing shows up to me as knowing, and vice versa.
This person?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
And if I think I know something, it shows up as not knowing, or if someone else thinks they know something, it shows up as not knowing. So how does that show up as its opposite? How does your not knowing show up as knowing?
Because there's no position on anything, so that anything that shows up is, and it's not a talent particularly. It's just not. It's just there's not two things anywhere. So therefore, you ask a question, and then I respond, as I'm doing now. I'm saying the question and my response to it are not separate. So therefore, it looks like I'm responding to something that is helpful to you, but it's something you could see yourself. So I'm, in a sense, and this isn't exactly like this, but it's like by talking to someone who is confused, if they'll share their confusion with me by asking a question on some level, then my response to them is not something I'm doing to respond. It's an aspect of what they're asking me. It's like saying the question and the answer are not two separate things. They're two aspects of the same. There are two ways that one thing shows up. How did I do? Yes.
Is our seeing your teaching as understanding something that we're adding on?
Mm-hmm. You're projecting onto it. It's called a cosmic joke. Looks like I know things. Looks like it. I keep my hojas all full of books. I don't read any of them. But I like the book studies. I don't read that stuff. But you ask me questions about it, and I don't know. I don't know. Does it sound like I know stuff? Does anyone ever said when I'm not there, let's not have Sokuzan come? Cannot have him come. Because he's just so full of himself, and he starts answering all these questions. He doesn't even read this. Why would we have him come? Let's just do it ourselves. Yes.
Does it feel like I can't see something without your help?
A teacher, student, same thing. I worked in that same with my first teacher, Trungpa Rinpoche. It was very much that way for years and years and years. But I'm a very slow learner, and you're much faster than I am, so you'll do better. And you get to talk to me all the time. And eventually you'll see that I'm just full of it. It has to do with the lack of fixation on correct or incorrect, and a willingness to not know. Pure appearance. Brandon.
Labels like depression and anxiety and all that, are those possible without thinking?
Yes. That whole area is very, the negative feeling that we impute or call depression, because we don't know what it is. We don't know what causes it, but it's a negative feeling. We get up in the morning and we feel just like not worth living, or that kind of thing. Then we tend to make up stuff around it, blame something, or it must be because of this, because of that. But to actually just be in the depression, actually sink down in it, could be pretty painful, could be terrifying. I'm not recommending that necessarily, because there's so many ways that can show up. But I'm saying you could give it a shot. You could take whatever arises, and without inventing things around it or thoughts around it necessarily, and go into the texture of it, which means, how does it feel? What is the feeling? As I've said, feeling, deep feeling is like, actually that metaphor, it's like very deep. You're going to go into that feeling. You're not fueling it necessarily. You're not clinging to it necessarily. You just receive that feeling without anything extra. No particular elaboration or commentary on it. And there may be some discursive thought or some thinking fluttering around that, but it's probably fairly low if you're you're no longer fighting with your experience. You're no longer making any demands on anything anymore. And that, whatever the naming of that, I sometimes say, when you have a feeling that you don't know what it is, and as soon as you name it, depression, you've actually stopped looking at it. Especially if you start to talk to others about your feeling, we tend to back away, and we get to kind of hide out from it. But weather being, and cycles being what they are, it's probably going to come back around for another visit, and then you'll have another opportunity to just let it be what it is. So we don't know the causes and conditions that bring about those things. We can have guesswork. Well, it's because of this, because of that, because of this, and people are doing that all the time. But as meditators, and as people who are trying to do this through our own awareness, my recommendation is hold still and just look at the emotion. Don't push it, don't pull it. Aggression, passion, and don't turn away, distract yourself, or eat Hershey bars. No substitute for it. Yes.
Another question from Andrew.
Okay. Take one more.
Does an answer just support someone in investigating their own question?
Well, perhaps. My answers, I do the best I can. I'm not, I don't have the kind of intellect that some people do, so therefore I'm not able to convert what I understand into words so easily, even though I talk all the time. I give lots of Dharma talks. A lot of it I depend on questions. So I do it with people. Even the one little book that we has in print has been sitting down and giving instruction on meditation, on basically how it looks to me, how this should be done. So not so much an opinion. So the whole question and answer situation is kind of an interchange between someone who is looking for some kind of understanding or answers and someone who is not looking for anything, simply put. So not making a claim with some kind of identity like, oh, I don't need anything. Not saying that. I might be saying, no, I'm not going to do that one. That'd be giving too much away. You guys would have a better idea of how confused I am. I'm not going to do that. So no longer at war with anything. No confusion can come. Come on, sit right here. Depression can come. Have a seat. Make yourself at home. Milarepa's the wonderful metaphor for that was the way Milarepa handled his demons. He kept fighting with them back in the 11th century. And as the story goes, he finally just got out the teapot and said, "Here, have some tea." As soon as he opened himself up to his demons, they all vanished because they were aspects of his own mind. So make friends with yourself, my friends. Make friends with your enemies. Whatever is very, very negative, don't reject, don't accept, don't look away. Do nothing with it. And this is no guarantee that if you do this, you feel like you're really doing what I'm recommending, that in 3 weeks you can start making demands that it needs to work, because it's not exact. It doesn't really work like that. How it works is something you need to find out. It's called an open secret. If you can see it, it's obvious. If you can't see it, it looks like it's hidden somewhere. Thank you very much.
We'll stand and dedicate the merit in the back of our red chant books. I'd like to once again remind everyone of the donation boxes that we have in the hallway. We also accept your financial support via PayPal, checks in the mail, cash, debit and credit cards.
May this penetrate into all places, so that we and every sentient being together can realize the Buddha's way. Jiro san shi shifu, shi son mu sa moko sa. The 10 directions, the 3 worlds, all Buddhas, all venerable ones, Bodhisattvas, Mahasattvas, the great Prajna, Paramita.
The Buddhas and Bodhisattvas of the 10 directions and the 3 dives, please hear us. Please come down out of the light and protect Sokukoji Buddhist Temple Monastery, our Sangha, families, friends, and visitors. Heal everyone who is unhappy, sick, or suffering, and fill them with light.